Hey, everybody. God bless you guys. Welcome to Get Real Radio. My name is Pastor Jonah Hadley. Thank you for joining us here on the program. Get Real is a radio and podcast outreach ministry of Mercy Chapel, located at 1861 Main Street in Sanford, Maine. If you're interested in learning more about Get Real and Mercy Chapel, Get Real is available on all major podcasting platforms. You can also download the Mercy Chapel app. You can visit us at mercychapelmaine.org if you would like to support this particular ministry. Thank you for joining us here on the show. This week, we have been talking about work and the workplace and our conduct in the workplace. What should the attitude of a believer be in the midst of, even if you find yourself working in a secular world, do we conform to the secular world when things are unfair? When we find ourselves being mistreated, what do we do? In the days that we're living in right now, many of us in various, facets of the workplace, we have resources and human resources, divisions and offices that we can go to when and if the time comes that we're being mistreated. And that's changed over the course of the past, even in the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, the human resources departments in workplaces have really ramped up, especially now. But as believers, we are covered by Christ. And as believers, we find ourselves all too oftentimes getting, losing the joyful aspect of being able to work because the workplace can be so difficult. And it can be hard for us to see that the Lord is working in every area of our lives. And this is a point that I've really been hammering home this week. It's understanding that when we go to work, we're not just operating in God's blind spot. We are going to serve the Lord. And numerous times throughout the scriptures, God calls us to absorb sometimes and to be good representatives, to go the extra mile when it comes to certain things. And that's not just in church. And that's not just when it comes to, serving people who we deem as needy. All right. Yes, we can go the extra mile with helping the homeless, bringing people food, helping the poor, helping the orphans, helping the widows. Absolutely. And those are things that we do with joy most oftentimes. But when it comes to the workplace, many of us suffer because we fail to see the blessing, even in the difficult situation at work. We fail to see the blessing. And we've come under certain conditions, work conditions that can be deplorable. We have found ourselves in situations where we are being mistreated, or we're being treated unfairly, or we're being passed over. All of those things happen. They happen all the time. Or we find ourselves, being asked by a manager or a boss to do something that is above and beyond our either our ability or above our particular responsibility. And all of a sudden, we just nope, I'm not going to do that unless he gives me more money. And I talked a little bit about this trend that seems to be permeating our culture right now, especially the labor force. And outside the fact that there are so many jobs out there and a lot of young people aren't getting into the workforce for whatever reason, but that's a conversation for another day. As believers, we should always be conducting ourselves as Christians, no matter where we are. And thank the Lord, because the jobs that we have, as difficult as they can be, the mindset that we have going into some of these jobs can really have an effect on how much joy we see in that. Because if we go to work every single day expecting the worst, then we will get the worst. If we go to work every single day just, rolling our eyes, can't stand the people that we're working with, I know that my boss is going to ask me to do this, or I know that so-and-so is going to do this. And then even if you're a boss, even if you're a manager or a business owner, you can start to get embittered towards your employees or those who are working underneath you. There's all sorts of times, even as a manager, that you can be gracious towards your subordinates. All right. So it's workplace is just as spiritual. The workplace is just as spiritual as anything that we do for the Lord. But last time we were in Colossians chapter 3, and Paul kind of builds on this point in Colossians chapter 3. He builds on being faithful and understanding that we're working for the Lord. And he goes on in verse 18, where Paul says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord." Talking about the family right away. Fathers, don't provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Really, really great stuff. There's just in these 4 or 5 verses, there are weeks and weeks of sermons that we could delve into, but we're not going to for the sake of the point. But then he goes on here in verse 22. Bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. Now stop right there. Now listen. Bondservants, the doulos, the ones, the willing servants who serve their masters with a desire. Now, bondservants, generally speaking, they were people who were now choosing to serve good masters, okay? Some of them found, again, in the culture of the day, if they were servants or if they were slaves, if they found themselves serving a master that was worth sticking around for, they would do that. If they found a good house that was treating them well and treating them okay and they didn't want to go anywhere, then they called themselves a doulos. They were a bondservant. They were choosing to serve that master for the rest of their days. But still, people are people, and sometimes people can get lazy. Sometimes those of us who work in the workforce, we can get complacent or we can get lazy, and we only start working harder when the boss comes around. All right? All of a sudden, man, the work stops when the boss leaves, and next thing you know, the boss or the manager or the owner or whoever, he drives up on the job site, or he comes walking down the hallway, or next thing you know, you're seeing your boss. If you're working in in areas of retail, you see your boss coming down the hallway. Next thing you know, man, everybody starts working, everybody starts sweeping, everybody starts doing something because the boss is coming around. What Paul says here, nothing's new. There's nothing new under the sun. People are people and have been this way since the dawn of time, since the fall of Adam. And there's nothing new, and God deals with that right here. He says, obey all things your masters. Obey in all things, rather, your masters according to the flesh. That even though, okay, what Paul says is they are your masters according to the flesh. These are the people that God has put over you by divine appointment. The jobs that you have and the position that we have is a position that God has ordained. And so those masters, okay, so we could very easily equate this to managers, bosses, overseers, foremen, superior officers if you work in the military or if you're working in some sort of municipality. Very easily you could make this parallel here. So when he says, bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service. All right. You're not just working when they come around. You're not just kind of turning it on when the boss is looking and then turning it off when he or she turns his back. That's what he's saying. Not with eye service as men pleasers. You're not just kind of looking to fake it till you make it. Don't do that. Have integrity in what you do. Work with a certain degree of pride. And this is something I touched on in one of our earlier sessions. Something that's really missing in the workforce today. I know I touched on the quiet quitting thing, but something that's really missing in the workforce today, and I know I'm going to date myself here, and I don't want to sound like a crotchety old codger here, but I remember a time when people went to work and really wanted to excel at what they did. Now, I know that this is a generalization, okay? This is a generational generalization. I realize that there are details to this that I'm not going to be able to have time to fill in. But generally, overall, in the past, I remember, working in the 90s as I was kind of, I became, right around in the early 90s, 90, 91, 92, I started working for myself, cutting grass. And then I entered into the workforce at like 14 when I was legally able to work and get a paycheck, right? But I remember that there was a certain degree of integrity that people had in what they did. My very first job, I worked at, very first job where I was on a payroll. I was paying into Social Security, paying my taxes. Okay, real first job. It was at McDonald's and in my hometown where I was living. And I worked at this McDonald's. And I remember as I went to McDonald's and I filled out the application. My dad grabbed me and I was wearing a T-shirt to get into the car to go down to McDonald's to fill out this application. My dad grabs me, turns me back into the house, marches me back inside, and says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to fill out the application to go work at McDonald's." He goes, "Looking like that?" He goes, "No, you dress like you want this job." And just to go fill out the application, my dad made me go and fill out the application with a shirt and a tie on. And this was back in 1992, 91, 92. And I went down to McDonald's and I filled out the application. And that was commonplace. That was just what you did. You went and filled out this job application with a shirt and a tie on. This was even before the interview. So then I talked to the manager, and the manager interviewed me, and I went to this interview at like 14 years old. I went to this interview with a shirt and a tie on, sitting down with this man, interviewing like I was going to be working on Wall Street, looking like I really wanted this job. And something has been lost. There's been a certain degree of integrity in the workforce that has been lost. And that was back then. And then since then, every job that I ever had, I went and interviewed in a shirt and tie, because my father said, he instilled some very good wisdom. Every job you go in for, you want to go in dressed like you actually want the job. You want to present yourself in such a way that a manager is going to look at you and know from your appearance, right off the rip, how you look, that you are a man of integrity, that you're a person of integrity who's going to do their job well just based on how they present themselves. And this is something that has been lost. Now in the workplace, man, we don't even care. Well, not that, again, in the areas of construction, in the trades, it's difficult because you're working in jeans and a T-shirt and stuff, and it can be hard. And in certain areas in the workplace, again, it's hard to keep yourself in a presentable fashion. However, you can still do your job with integrity. You can still do your job with a desire to glorify Christ in everything. Paul goes on and says this, not as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. In the workplace, we are working for God. We're not just working for our bosses. We're working for the Lord. We're representing Christ. Everything we do should be excellent. Everything that we do, again, should be above and beyond. It should be better than everybody else in as much as we're able. Our hearts should want to really serve and to do well in everything that we put our hands to or our hearts to or our minds to. Not as men pleasers. We're not just going to work hard because the boss is looking at us. We're just going to keep on going and working at the same pace because we know that God is looking at us. The Lord is looking in on how we're working. And then he goes on and says this, and whatever you do, in verse 23, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. Do it with all your heart as to the Lord. Thank the Lord for the job that you have. Thank the Lord for the abilities that you have. He goes, knowing that from the Lord. Now here, I touched on this before. Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. Don't worry about whether or not your boss is going to see you and reward you. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to get passed over or not get passed over for a promotion. Don't worry about it. You serve the Lord. The Lord will see your heart. He will see your faithfulness. The Lord will see your integrity. He will see that you desire to worship and honor him in everything you do. And who do you think all these people work for? It's the Lord who gives the increase. It's the Lord who gives the promotions. It's the Lord from where our blessings flow from. He's the one who gives. He's the one who provides. Don't worry about what other people think of you. In everything we do, understand that the jobs that we have are given to us by Christ to provide for our needs, and it's a blessing. No matter how hard the people are that we work with, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how long it takes to get to work and the traffic that we have to battle and the tolls that we have to pay, everything we do heartily as unto the Lord, knowing that he's the one that sees and he's the one that gives the increase. He's the one that gives the promotions. God bless you guys. We will see you guys here next time on Get Real Radio, turning hearers into doers. Bye-bye.